Welcome to this latest edition of the Real Deal podcast. I'm your host, Cyril Gerald-Quinn, as we continue to look back at Chicago Bulls Michael Jordan classic games. We revisit a game seven, 1998 Eastern Conference Final matchup against the Indiana Pacers. A game, of course, where Chicago Bulls won 88 to 83. A game in which this was without question the toughest game that the Bulls ever had when they were champions. Without question. We look back, they had only been in one other game seven in that Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, Phil Jackson era, and that was of course the Knicks in '92, and they won that game seven easily. They had been in a bunch of course, game sixes. Most of the series that they won when they didn't sweep, they would win in six games. This one was a lot different. This was a brutally physical game. Um, they were taking on a Pacer team that was ready to try to win a championship. This Pacer team was a very good Pacer team. They were 58 and 24 in the regular season. They had a run from 94 to 2000 where basically they were in the conference finals five times in 7 years, including making to the NBA finals back in 2000, their only appearance in the NBA finals. But look at their run they had. 94 to go conference finals, 95 and then losing a game seven. 95 conference finals, losing a game seven to Orlando. 96 they missed the playoffs. 96 they lose in the first round to Atlanta. 97 they missed the playoffs. Then Bird gets there. This is the first of 3 years. 3 years in terms of him coaching them. They get to the conference finals, lose to the Bulls in game seven. 99 lose to the Knicks in the conference finals in the game six. And of course lose to the Lakers in 2000 in six games. So the Pacers had a nice little run here for about 7 years. And this was a balanced Pacer team. You still had this still was prime Reggie Miller. This is '98. He wouldn't retire, of course, till 2005, so he still was still in his prime, still an all-star, still one of the best shooters in the NBA. Rick Smits was still effective. You still had the Davis boys, um, and they had a very young and deep. They had a very talented bench. I mean, they were coming off the bench with Travis Best, Jalen Rose, Antonio Davis, Derek McKee. So they were deep. They were a deep team, and they again defensive team didn't like to get up and down the court, slow pace. Played at a relatively slow pace. But this was a team that again was a tough matchup for Chicago going to in '98. Now, Chicago, of course, this is the last season. As we were watching the documentary, The Last Dance. This was it. They that season they won 61 games. Despite the fact that Scottie Pippen missed the first couple of months, they were a team. This was it in terms of this was going to be their last time for them being together. You have Michael Jordan, who was MVP that year. He's at a stage in his career where he basically is a floor player, and I mean by that Air Jordan. He was not high flying Michael Jordan. He was strong, physical, in the post, would pick and choose his spots. When to score, would pick and choose his spots when to expend energy. At this stage in his career, he was a guy who was a chess master out there on the basketball court. It was about the mental part of his game at this stage in his career. Leading up into this game, this was a very closely contested series. You had 6 of the 7 games decided by 6 points or less. This game would be no different. The only blowout was in game five, where Chicago won by 21. And the Pacers, again, the Pacers were coming off of game six, where they, were coming off an impressive performance in game six. And this is how dominant the Bulls were. The Bulls played 12 series between conference finals and NBA finals in their championship run. This was their only, out of those 12 series, this was their only game seven. So no game sevens in the conference, no game sevens in the NBA finals, and only one game seven in the conference finals during that run where they won 6 championships in 8 years. On the broadcast, of course, this was when NBC still had the games. You had Bob Costas, Isaiah Thomas, Doug Collins, and Isaiah Thomas. Now remember, Marv Albert was suspended. He was in the midst of a 3-year suspension. He had a sexual assault charge. Now he got charged with sexual assault misdemeanor. He pled guilty to that charge and did, basically, he was fortunate that this happened in 1997 versus 2020. 2020, his career would have been over because you go back and read some of the details of that case, and it's like, ooh, it was biting women and some of the stuff that some of those details were just crazy. Um, so you had Isaiah, you had again Bob Costas, legendary broadcaster, Doug Collins, who was the best color commentator in the business to me in terms of basketball analyst, and Isaiah Thomas. Isaiah Thomas was good in this game. I mean, Isaiah Thomas was great in this game because Isaiah he didn't talk over the broadcast. He gave you came from a player's perspective. Was very was good in terms of pointing out where Jordan was at in terms of when Jordan picking his spots, getting you going into the psyche of a Michael Jordan because Isaiah was a great player as well. So Isaiah was great in this game. He really was. When you go back and listen to this broadcast, when you go back and watch this game was a slow paced game. You're talking about, I mean, slow like it would barely be recognizable in today's game. It wouldn't be recognizable. Both these teams played. There were very few fast breaks during the course of this game. Both these teams were in a situation where they were content to play half court basketball, and you have a situation where Dennis Rodman isn't even starting at this point for the Bulls. He's coming off the bench. The Pacers get off to a fast start. They jump out 14-5. They jump out 14-5. They were up 20 to 8 at one point. Then Dennis Rodman comes in the game and changes the whole complexion of this game with his energy, rebounding, doing the little things. Jordan at the end of the first quarter only has 2 points in this game. Indiana is up 27. Indiana is up 27 to 19 at that point. Um, Chicago has a big defensive second quarter and holds Indiana to 19 points. And Reggie Miller, keeps the Indiana within striking distance with two big threes at the end towards the end of the half, and Chicago's up by 3. Now again, if you're Indiana going through over the course of this game 7, you are at this point you're good. Like you are not stressing at all about where you're at. You're down by 3 in the game 7. Indiana is a team that was a little bit they had some veterans, but had better quality depth off the bench. Thought that they could possibly um, wear Chicago out over the course of during this game. That would not be the case, but that's what they were hoping. Watching this game, and you look at the Indiana coaching staff. You have Larry Bird, you have Dick Harder, who at this point is one of the best specialists in the whole entire league as a defensive guy. He was the one that was responsible for their defensive schemes, and you have a young Rick Carlisle, who would of course end up going on to have great success coaching, Indiana, Detroit, as well as of course winning a championship in 2011 with Dallas. Um, Chicago destroyed Indiana in this game off the offensive glass. They out rebounded Indiana 22 to 8. Total rebounds, they out rebounded Indiana 50 to 34. And that to me that was the difference in the game. Um, Indiana shot 48%. Chicago shot like 38%. But it didn't matter. When you're getting out rebounded at that rate, then it just, I'm thinking about it. In this game, Indiana only got 56 shots. Chicago took, Chicago got 76 shots in this game, and that was, that was that was something that Phil Jackson teams have done consistently, whether it be the Lakers and the Bulls. They always pound you on the glass. They always pound you on the glass, and you saw that. You see, we did a couple weeks ago. We did game 7 Lakers Celtics, where the Lakers killed the Celtics on the glass, and despite the fact that the Celtics outshot them, a game where Kobe Bryant has 15 rebounds. You had Paul Gasol with 18 rebounds in that game, and that has been a constant was a constant theme throughout the course of Phil Jackson's career with his particular teams. Um, cool coach was big in this game. 21 points, 14 in the 14 in the fourth quarter, and this was a game where Michael Jordan needed everybody. It was kind of like a culmination of all the years where he had been pounding on guys, berating guys, and all his tough love and all that came to all that you know really showed up big in this series in this game because you had he was Kukoc was one of the guys where he would constantly get on Steve Kerr, and those guys had big games, and that the one thing about Chicago, the one thing about the Lakers when during Phil Jackson's time there was the fact that his role players, and this is one thing Jackson does not get enough credit for. Everybody talks about, yeah, he had Shaq and Kobe, Michael and Scotty, and Dennis Rodman, so 5 Hall of Famers. But Phil Jackson, Phil Jackson's role players over the course of his career, whether it's a John Paxson, whether it's a Steve Kerr, Robert Horry, Ron Harper, Rick Fox, Kukoc, all those guys, Derek Fisher, all those guys made big shots and big plays in key situations. You had Ron Artest in Game 7 in 2010 with the Lakers and Celtics, and it was no different in this game. Michael Jordan, frankly, was not good in this game. This probably was one of the worst. This in terms of big game performances. This probably was one of Michael Jordan's worst when you taking into account critical game 6s or critical game 5, the series tied at 2, or decisive games where it be the 3 game 7s, or whether it be a game 7 against the Knicks, a game 7 against the Pistons, a game 5 against Cleveland. This was one of his worst performances. He was only 9 for 25. Now he did have a great floor game, played his usual great defense, 8 assists, 9 rebounds, missed 5 free throws in this game, 10 for 15, and at one point missed 7 straight shots. Now, fourth quarter, he scores 9 points. The majority of that was on free throws. It got to a point where he just said, "You know what? I'm gonna put my head down and I'm getting to the line. Put my head down. I'm going. That's it. I'm not selling for any jump shots." And I mean, you really think about it, most of his shots were either in the paint or were of the mid range variety. And this was a game where Jordan needed everybody in this game to win. I mean, this was absolutely a team win when you look at it. This was the epitome of a team win when you look at the Bulls in this game. I mean, even guys like we talk about Rodman's energy, even Jud Bushler gave them some good minutes. He had 5 rebounds. We already talked about Steve Kerr had 11 points off the bench. We already talked about what Tony Kukoc did. Scottie Pippen 17 and 12, including just suffocating defense on Mark Jackson. And Pippen, we know Pippen is one of the great perimeter defensive players of all time, maybe the greatest perimeter defensive player of all time with Kawhi Leonard, coming fast with what he's been able to accomplish in his career. But he completely took Mark Jackson out of his game. I mean, he's pressing Mark Jackson up full court, 94 feet, and just Indiana's getting into their offense late. He's trying to see where Reggie Miller is at in terms of when he's pressing Mark Jackson and turning his shoulder to see where Reggie Miller is at and see where the screen is going to come from. Fascinating game to watch as far as the games within the games, as far as where these two teams were at in their respective runs to try to win a championship. Uh, Again, was not a pretty game. A lot of missed shots, a lot of fouls, a lot of stretches where the teams had a tough time scoring. No 30-point quarters. When you look at this game, a bunch of quarters where you look at Indiana, they have 3 quarters. Look at Indiana. Indiana had 3 quarters where they stuck where they 2 quarters where they struggled to crack 20 points. Chicago had 2 quarters where they struggled to crack 20 points. But this was one of these games where um, Chicago won it on their championship moxie, and they won it with their championship medal. And they did not overwhelm Indiana. It wasn't. They were not going to overwhelm Indiana with talent. Indiana was not going to fold. Um, it's going to be a game where Indiana is going to be kicking themselves for 2 reasons. Number one, Indiana had a 3-point lead late in the fourth quarter, or midway through the fourth quarter, at 77-74. They have a jump ball. Chicago gets the jump ball, and Steve Kerr makes a three. From that point on, Indiana was outscored to end the game by Chicago 9 to. Indiana was outscored at that point by Chicago to end the game like 11-3 or 11-6 at that point to end the game. They're up 77-74. Indiana only scored 9 points like in the last like 7 minutes. In the last 6 minutes, Indiana had only 9 points in that stretch. And after all these years of watching Reggie Miller, 22 points, but had no points in the fourth quarter, only had one shot, which is remarkable when you think about it. And at the time, when you're watching the game, you say there's no way you wouldn't even dream that Reggie Miller will only get one shot. But the reason why Indiana lost this game, besides the rebounded numbers and besides the rebounding and missed free throws, Indiana missed a bunch of free throws, but so did Chicago. I mean, both teams were horrible at the line. Both teams were like Chicago was Indiana was 23 of 37. Chicago wasn't that much better, 24 of 41 from the 24 of 41 at the line. Like I said, even Jordan missed 5 free throws. But the reason why Indiana lost this game is very simple to me in watching it all these years later. First time I've watched this game in about maybe 5 or 6, in at least 5 or 6 years. They've occasionally come on NBA TV with the hardwood classics. Indiana did not have a guy that they can get the ball to that can give you 2 points. They're running their offense through Rick Smits in the fourth quarter. And I'm like, Rick Smits is a good player and had some big games in this series, but you're not beating the Chicago. You're not winning a championship running your offense through Rick Smits. He's not Akeem Olajuwon here. And that's the first thing. And they did not have a guy who can put the ball on the floor and get buckets. Jalen Rose had two big buckets in the fourth quarter, but he was not at that point in his career like he would be 2 years later when he helped Indiana get to the finals. And when he probably was their best player in 2000. He was not at that point to where he can create his own offense and create for others. He wasn't at that point yet. Mark Jackson, yeah, can create offense for others, but couldn't get his own shot. Travis Best, good energy guy, quick, but you don't want Travis at that point. You don't want Travis Best running your offense. Reggie Miller, of course, needs screens. Was a catch and shoot player, needs screens to get open and make shots. He's not beating people off the dribble and getting to the line. You need a guy, a perimeter player, preferably, to get to the line, to be able to handle the ball and get to the line. And you think about it, and I was thinking about this too watching this game, it's probably a reason why Utah couldn't beat Chicago. Because John Stockton, though, can create for other people, could not get his own offense to where he could where at the end of the game John Stockton is getting buckets. and getting to the line. Karl Malone needed Stockton, needed somebody to pass him the ball to get his own offense. So one of the reasons, why Chicago were winning championships, and besides having they had the best team, had the best player. How many teams they face in that run to where you had a perimeter player that can create his own shot for not only other people but for themselves. One time, look at their one loss in this stretch. 95 Orlando, Penny Hardaway. Get his own shot and get shot for others. So I thought that was probably the number one reason, a big reason why Indiana lost this game. Regardless of that, if you're Indiana, you absolutely could have easily won this game. I'm not gonna say you should have won this game because if you can't control your own backboard, you don't deserve to win. But this was a very winnable game for Indiana. It's very winnable. It would be a tough film to watch if you're Indiana. I'm probably sure that Indiana hasn't watched. I'm probably sure that if you're Larry Bird, if you're Reggie Miller, if you're anybody part of that team, that you probably haven't even watched this film. Chicago was beatable. They were not good in this game. They were not. They were definitely beatable. But it's again is knowing how to win. I mean, when you get to a certain level, you saw this with Chicago throughout the course of their championship runs. You saw it with Houston when they went back to back. You saw it with the Lakers on two separate occasions, with Shaq and Kobe, and then with Kobe and Gasol, and in the early 2000s or the late 2000s. I mean, Shaw with the Spurs all those years, it's a big deal in terms of knowing how to win because a lot of these game sevens, and this one in particular, they're going to be ugly games. And you go look at the history of game sevens in the NBA, a lot of these scores are in the 90s, 85, 86, 90, 83. Go look at the last probably 10 to 12 game sevens in a conference finals or in NBA finals and look at those scores of those games. They have not been high scoring games, and there's been a lot of missed shots. The difference between a game here and there is intangible plays, hustle plays. So Indiana had to be kicking themselves after this game. This was a absolute winnable game for the Pacers. Again, Michael Jordan's performance in this game, you know, he did what he had to do. Um, Again, 925. The candidates get caught up in obviously it's easier to look at the scoring, the shooting or lack thereof. But again, in a game seven, those 8 assists and 9 rebounds and 15 free throw attempts are big in a game seven. 15 free throw attempts. You're putting in extra fouls. You're stopping the clock. You're allowing yourself down your team, getting rest, um, putting fouls on key players for the Pacers. I mean, those are big, and those are big in a game seven. Um, I thought that I'm looking at things that Indiana could have done outside of the rebounding. I mean, from a strategy standpoint, again, they did not. Maybe a little bit more Jalen Rose in this game. Rose in this game played about 15 minutes. Look it up here. Rose played about 16 minutes, but again, he's at a stage in his career where he's not. He was a role player. He was an effective role player at this stage in his career. But this to me was by far the toughest series outside of them losing to Chicago, losing to Orlando in '95 that the Bulls had. Even tougher than the Utah series where where you had game sixes and the Bulls had to make a last shot basically to win those game sixes, especially of course the Jordan shot in Utah in '98. Um, Indiana pushed them. I mean, they pushed Chicago, and again, Chicago. You look at how many players contributed to this win. I mentioned Judd Bushler, Rodman's energy, Steve Kerr making shots, Tony Kukoc's 21 points. So they had even Luke Longley. with a big shot over the course of this game. So it was they Jordan had plenty of help during during the course of this game, and Indiana just needed that guy who can get you a basket in a key situation. Like I say, look at a football game, fourth quarter. You looking at fourth quarter pass rush. In a fourth quarter of an NBA playoff game, particularly Game 7, you need a guy that can get buckets. It's just that simple. You need a guy that can get 2 points. Either you can throw it into him like a Tim Duncan, Shaquille O'Neal in their primes, or a perimeter player that can create his own shot, or and get to the line. And for all the great things Donnie Walsh did as the general manager of the Pacers, that is the one thing he failed them at. In particular, in one thing he failed them at during his tenure as a Pacer GM and president, not getting that perimeter player that can consistently get shots and could come up big in critical situations in a playoff series. So Chicago wins this game by 5. Pacers offense was non-existent in the fourth quarter, especially the last 4 or 5 minutes of the fourth quarter. The Pacers had their chances in this game. Jordan had 9 points in the fourth quarter, and again, had a stretch where he could not buy a shot. Missed 7 straight shots going into the fourth quarter, like that carried over from the second half into the fourth quarter. You'll look at this. You'll look at Reggie Miller only having one field goal attempt in the fourth quarter, and again, I can't. That's to me, if you're Larry Bird, you've got to find a way to get Reggie Miller more shots. And it wasn't just Chicago defense, which is great. It wasn't just you give their defense credit, but Reggie Miller is Reggie Miller. He's one of the greatest shooters in the history of the NBA. You gotta give him more shots than that. Again, I thought the game call was great with Costas, Collins, and Thomas. Isaiah, who would go on. Isaiah was right in the mindset, in the psyche of Michael Jordan. He's right on top of that. And again, not you see a lot of guys who be ex players who are just not that good, especially all time great players who are just not that good at calling games. I mean, uh, Magic Johnson is bad, it's horrible during his time, and they had Magic Johnson calling NBA Finals games. Remember in the early '90s when they had Magic call? I believe Magic called the Portland series in '92. Magic was bad. Coaching and broadcasting, Magic was not good. Everything else, Magic has been an A+ in his life. Of course, Chicago would go on to win the championship that year. In 6 games against Utah, a well-rested Utah team. As Utah had swept the Lakers that year. And again, thinking about the next couple games, we're gonna do a Utah. Of course, we're gonna do that Game 6 Utah. That's definitely one of the games that we're gonna do with this series of Bulls classics, and we're gonna do a game, one of those Phoenix games in '93. That was a wild series. So we're gonna do one of those games. Haven't decided yet which Phoenix game I'm gonna do, but we're gonna do one of them. But the Bulls are going to win a championship. Indiana was not done at all after this. They would go on to make the conference finals in '99 and 2000. Indiana falls into a long list of teams that were denied by Chicago Bulls. Again, a laundry list of teams where you talk about the Utah Jazz, Seattle, Portland, Knicks, Cleveland, Orlando for that year in '96. Just a laundry list of teams that Chicago kept from getting to the finals or kept from winning championships. Um, I don't ever get the sense that Indiana was a championship caliber team. Um, like if it wasn't for Chicago, Utah's winning a championship. If it wasn't for Chicago, the Phoenix is winning a championship. New York probably is winning a championship. Seattle's winning a championship. I don't think that for Indiana. I think Indiana was just good enough to possibly get to the finals, which they did one time. I don't think that this was there. I don't think they were a championship roster for the reason that I mentioned earlier about not having that scorer that can create his own shot and not get other people involved and create their own shot. And I think if you want to win a championship, and I don't care what era, you have to have a guy that could do that, that can create their own shot, and that can create their own shot and get to the line. Either you had to have that, or have somebody, or have a Tim Duncan. You know, those when the Spurs won those championships early, the early Tim Duncan championships before Parker and Ginobili came along, they it was they had a bunch of shooters and guys like that, but they had Tim Duncan like that. That's the ultimate equalizer. Houston had Hakeem Olajuwon even before they got projects. That team, they didn't have guys that can create their own shot in that '93 team. So you either had to have a dominant post presence that was iconic, or just a legendary guy like that, or have a guy as we moved into the 2000s that can get their own shot. That dominant perimeter player, dominant perimeter player. As I try to speak here, Indiana had neither of those guys, and they did. Larry Bird did a phenomenal job when you think about it, with this team. I mean, they were a tough team. They were great defensively. They shot the ball well. They played. They were fundamentally sound. They had a deep bench, and they did an excellent job. Did an excellent job of developing talent. Travis Best, Jalen Rose, guys like that. Walsh did a tremendous job of putting together teams. Getting veteran guys. Chris Mullin, Derek McKee. Guys played their roles. The Davis boys. They were bruisers. That was their role. But that's not going to put you over the top in terms of winning a championship. But at the end of the day, you got to give credit where credit's due. The Chicago Bulls were a dynasty for a reason. They knew how to win these tough, gritty, grinded out games. And even in the finals against Utah, that was a low scoring game. What was 80, game 6, 98, 87, 86. That was a defensive game. They knew how to win those tough games, and they knew how to make plays, down the stretch, make big shots, make big defensive plays. And again, this game, all the abuse that Michael Jordan laid on his teammates paid off in this game. There was a major payoff with that, because those guys came up big in a game 7. And if one of those guys doesn't play well, if Steve Kerr doesn't make those shots, if Tony Kukoc doesn't play well, they don't win this game. It's just that simple. They don't win this game. If Rodman doesn't provide that energy off the bench in the first quarter, maybe they're down by 20 instead of only down by 12. That's going to wrap it up for this latest edition of the Real Deal podcast. Chicago Bulls, Michael Jordan Classics. We'll be back next week with another game, another Bulls Classic, NBA Finals this time. I guarantee that. I will see you later on in the week with a Jordan documentary breakdown of episodes 3 and 4. Looking forward to that. Enjoy the rest of the evening. Be safe out here. I'm out.